Excited to be joined today by Dean Megan Carpenter of UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law, law.unh.edu, to learn more about what they're doing over there. Welcome back to the show, Dean.
Thank you so much for having me, AJ. It's great to see you.
So, full disclosure, I worked at the law school for 12 years before going over to other adventures. So, anyone that may have heard my appearances on other media around the law school, yeah, that was me. All right, so Dean Carpenter, you have a new law review article that was published in the University of New Hampshire Law Review titled Risk-Taking and Reform, Innovation for a Better Education. It's a great kind of encapsulation of a lot of the reforms that UNH Franklin Pierce has done over the decades, because it even goes back to Franklin Pierce Law Center being formed, and it kind of gives a good intro as to some of the more recent reforms around hybrid program, things like that the law school has done. But I mean, before diving into some of the specifics, what led you to actually put pen to paper for this?
Well, it was this past year has been the 50th anniversary of the law school, and so I think 50 years causes one to kind of reflect, and so we've been doing a lot of reflection on the creation of the law school and some of the things that have evolved over time, and then some of the things that have been really consistent. And when it comes to kind of risk-taking and reform, I think those are two big themes from the very founding of the law school. Was itself kind of a risk, and our founding dean said that the creation of the law school itself was an opportunity to stop talking about what's wrong with legal education and start doing something about it. And so we started doing that then in 1973, and we've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, which led to a lot of veterans joining into the school early on, the expansion of intellectual property programming around the school, which is world-renowned at this point, that's safe to say, and with alums all over the planet. I mean, what are some key reforms that the general public who maybe are not familiar with legal education might find value in knowing, and why it's important?
Well, you mentioned intellectual property, and so I'll start there. We were really founded to be the school that is focused on, the legal frameworks around human creativity, innovation, invention, content. And, it was founded in a way to be the law school for the information age, decades before anyone was realizing that we were in an information age, and that it would be the primary driver of our global commerce, and at the center of so many different grand challenges that we face, whether it's in finance or healthcare or global trade, arts and entertainment, sports, and our basic sort of invention and innovation as a society. And so we have focused on intellectual property and innovation for all of these years, and still today, that is a core strength of the law school. And we've not taken kind of just a theoretical approach either to IP or any other area of law. We pride ourselves in not just teaching students to think like lawyers, but also to be lawyers. So as I'm talking with alumni and employers that hire our students all the time, they want to hire our students because our students can graduate and add value sooner. They graduate and are able to kind of have the practical skill set that provides a good foundation for their practice from year one. And then I think that sort of segues into our other, I would say, most notable innovation that has really helped us stand out as among the national legal education environment, not just when it was created, but still today, and that is the Daniel Webster Scholars Honors Program. And that program is, in essence, an alternative licensing program where students spend the last 2 years of law school really sort of engaging in practical skills that will help them kind of hit the ground running upon graduation. And they're, in essence, taking the bar exam for 2 years, but doing so in a very practical way where they're engaging in simulations, they're writing motions, they're arguing before real judges. And it's a partnership between the law school, the Supreme Court of New Hampshire, and the New Hampshire Bar. It involves hundreds of volunteers and truly a community effort. But it is groundbreaking. It's as at a time when law schools across the country are saying, how should we really license lawyers? We kind of figured out a new path to do it that is competency based, and that program directed by Courtney Brooks today is still not, it wasn't just the first, but it is still the only alternative licensing program that is truly competency based.
I mean, that's what kind of kills me when I look at the legal industry as a whole. Is I've seen this program with the Daniel Webster Scholars Program, which is amazing, and anyone who's worked with one of the graduates of the program immediately thinks very, very highly of it. One of my colleagues, actually, where I work now, is one of the Daniel Webster Scholar alums. It kills me when I look across the landscape of legal education that other institutions aren't taking advantage of these ideas, and to me, it seems like there's two main factors that are stopping it. I'm curious if you agree, if there's other factors that come into it. Firstly, lawyers, they tend to follow the laws. Like, we're going to keep the traditions of it because it's a very we follow the book sort of industry, which is very important because you want to make sure there's consistency when it comes to the courts, and that there's a bit of a block when it comes to innovation when it comes to certain members of the legal industry across the country. I'm not speaking about New Hampshire necessarily. And then on the other side, academia still has that similar kind of problem where they kind of fall into bureaucracy and all the levels of leadership that you got to go through to really innovate and completely tear apart the program, say we're going to do this now because we've seen it work somewhere else. We've seen kind of trials that we've done. It doesn't seem like it really is able to get all the way up there. I mean, are there other things that I'm missing when it comes to this?
No, AJ, you're so insightful in that regard. I mean, is this perfect confluence of, obstacles to innovation? I would add maybe one other thing would be our regulators, which might be sort of lumped in with lawyers in general. The ABA, Council on Legal Education, takes on a unique role as our accreditor and our regulator in being sort of involved in kind of not just kind of the form, but some of the substance of the way that law schools are structured. But certainly, you're right. I mean, if you were to look up, on the Bureau of sort of labor and jobs, and you're looking up jobs kind of listed in the U.S. under the medical profession, you will see dozens of jobs listed that are involved in kind of the medical professional space. If you look up jobs in the legal space, it's essentially lawyer and paralegal. We haven't yet developed the kinds of, full-bodied approaches that could help solve some of our access to justice issues. And so I think we've, in some ways, law schools and the legal structures, lawyers in general, have kind of kept law precious for a unique few. And it's sort of, if I've done it this way, then this is the way that it needs to persist. In fairness, there are a lot of schools in a lot of states right now trying to figure out alternative licensing pathways. And there's some really innovative deans out there, some really innovative faculties. And one of the challenges is that, in New Hampshire, we're small enough that we're the only law school in New Hampshire, and we have a great relationship with the Supreme Court. We have a great relationship with the bar. And so the Daniel Webster Scholars Program is, in essence, this partnership that was able to be created because it's built on relationships. And in New Hampshire, those relations, there aren't 6 degrees of separation. There's 1 degree of separation between anyone and anyone else in New Hampshire. And so those relationships and the strength of those has enabled us to work together for the benefit of these students and their licensure. It becomes much more difficult. I was in Texas before I moved to New Hampshire, and it becomes more difficult in a state where there are 9 law schools, or a very different sizable population. So I think that those are some of the challenges that other states face, and I hope that we're kind of moving toward a direction where we're going to see a lot more innovation coming forward. But as you mentioned, it's not easy to innovate in higher education. The system. One of my former colleagues said that, institutions of higher education don't pivot, they evolve. And when it comes to innovation and change management, sometimes you don't have the luxury of that kind of that evolution takes a great deal of time.
Yeah, it's this difficult balance, as with anything when you want to turn around an industry or change it, is you need to make sure that, specifically we're talking about the legal education industry, you want to make sure you're training lawyers that are legit and they know what they're getting into after they graduate. They're going to be able to represent someone whose life literally depends on them, especially if you're talking criminal defense or some aspects of like handling estates and things like that, where you're talking an ungodly amount of money could be involved, or just where people's freedom, like they can end up in jail or end up in civil court and lose all their livelihood as a whole and their career and everything like that. So it's hugely important. But it's not surprising to hear that evolution basically was what has to happen, because you need to basically throw out a whole lot and just say, okay, we're going to do this. And I feel like an example of UNH succeeding in this with the hybrid program, rethinking how exactly the legal education is delivered in a way that, anecdotally, I've heard stories, online programs aren't always the top tier that you would expect, as opposed to what we're seeing with UNH, where it is very well respected and the students coming out of it speak very highly of the program.
Yeah, the hybrid program, just for audience members who are unfamiliar with it, is a JD, a law degree program that is designed for working professionals. And it was designed because we have a lot of folks, especially in the intellectual property and technology space, who've been out for a while and they have jobs and then they think they want to go to law school. And law school is expensive. And if you say to people, not only do you have to pay your tuition bills, but you also have to quit your job and maybe sell your home and maybe move across the country to get this top education in IP. Well, that's just like insult to injury to injury to injury. So if we designed this program to be kind of a top tier legal education that works for people wherever they're located. And so it works. We have people all across, not just across the country now, but we have people in other countries around the world who are in the program. We get them together. They do a lot of their work online, and it works whenever they have the time to do it. They can do it late night if they're late night people, morning, Saturday morning if they're Saturday morning people. And then we get them together 4 times a year for these immersive experiences with, when they're learning patent litigation, they're going to the second largest patent litigation court in the country. When they're learning IP strategies for the tech industry, they're doing that in Silicon Valley with some of the cutting edge leaders of that industry. If they're doing IP policy, they're doing it in DC with legislators and lobbyists and judges. So it's designed very specifically to work for people who also have careers and lives, and those people who bring that life experience and that work experience to the classroom. So the conversations, the learning is incredibly rich, and they're learning from one another. But here's the problem, and this goes back to kind of some of the sort of failures to innovate, especially in licensure. The program, they can be successful and graduate, but then once they graduate, when they take the bar exam, really what they need to do is take 6 or 8 weeks off and just cram, because the bar exam at this point really tests your short-term memory, not your ability to be a skilled lawyer. And so, that I think is ripe for innovation. And we see a lot of schools and a lot of forward-thinking legal scholars trying to figure out, how do we make licensure easier for and more responsive to the needs of practice. There's the next gen bar exam that's going to be coming out in the coming years, and we're learning more and more about that all the time. And I'm hoping that might help solve some of these issues.
Yeah, I didn't realize until I started working at the law school, they graduate, they get their diploma, and they go, oh boy, now I got to go for 2-3 months here, just nonstop be locked away in the library or in front of a computer screen, basically taking your 3-year education all over again for a couple months before you got to take this test that hopefully you pass. I mean, it's if you don't pass it, you can't practice as a lawyer. You still get a JD, which is good, and there's jobs for those individuals. And not everyone needs to necessarily take the bar, but most people go to law school. They want to practice as a lawyer. And fortunately, there's been changes over the years where there's now the unified bar. What's it called again?
Yeah, there's the uniform bar that then has been adopted by maybe 38 states, maybe a few more. And that's nice. I mean, different states have different cut scores for that, but that has been really a helpful movement. And then I think the next gen bar exam is going to be even more in that direction, but we have yet to kind of see the full breadth of what that's going to look like.
So you've mentioned a couple times licensure and innovation when it comes to the legal industry overall, outside of just specifically for people with a GAD. In fact, New Hampshire this year, Governor signed off on SB 361 that allows paralegals to represent clients in some cases and extends an amount of time where they are able to work out in the field and represent clients. I didn't realize, so we were talking right before, that you've actually spoken over at the State House about this innovation to the industry. I mean, for those who aren't aware, when we say paralegal, what does that mean at a high level, and in what ways are they looking to change what work they're able to do?
Mm-hmm. It's a lot, all in one. I think on one hand, if we're looking at kind of what paralegals are relative to licensed lawyers, a licensed attorney would be someone who has a JD, who's passed the bar exam, and is licensed to practice in a particular state. A paralegal is, generally a certificate program, and it is a kind of paraprofessional in the legal sphere that has the ability to do legal work to support lawyers, but not typically to be licensed to practice law in any kind of form. At the same time, we have this huge access to justice gap where not all of the people who need a lawyer have access to one or can afford one. And in the areas of family law, landlord-tenant disputes, debt collection, these are kinds of areas that perhaps licensed legal paraprofessionals can take on a certain amount of that legal work to help clients. And so there's been a push in a few states, including New Hampshire. I testified at the State House a couple of years ago for the talking about kind of some national movements and the impact that it would have in New Hampshire if we started this pilot program, which we did. And recently, this now has been extended, and I'm happy to see more people have access to the legal assistance that they need. There's some other states that are, I think the state of Washington might have been the first to do it, and Utah. Washington since sort of pulled back, but Arizona. There's several other states that are working in this space as well. Colorado, Minnesota, Oregon are awesome, and this will enable people who need that help in some of these limited areas to have have legal assistance at a lower price point than they would be able to, that they would have to pay for a lawyer. So, I think this is a good movement toward, or against some of the things we were talking about earlier, where we were saying that the legal practice and the legal profession has been kept kind of precious by a variety of people, whether it's in legal education or by the bar or by our regulators. And so this is kind of the unbundling of that a little bit. And I think it's a very healthy development overall that will result in more people getting the legal assistance that they need.
I mean, it's like basic economics. Like, if it takes, you got to get a 4-year undergrad degree, then you got to get a 3-year fairly expensive law degree afterwards, let alone any specializations or LLMs that you may get along the way, which is going to tack more onto it. There's just the time factor where it's someone who has not been working for as many years as people who only have an associate's or bachelor's degree. So it takes longer for them to really get up to speed as a full board professional in the field, and then add in all the student loans that come in accordingly with that. You've really seen on the medical side field huge innovations over the last few decades when it comes to this, where RNs are often now able to do a lot of work. Physician's assistants are basically treated as doctors when you go to any major practice, especially if you go to like a Dartmouth Hitchcock or something like that. PAs do a lot of the work. So it'll be really interesting over the next few years to see trials of this. It's going to take decades probably for the old legal field to turn it around and start going down that way. But aside from just allowing paralegals to kind of go down this, are there any other concepts floating around of this nature similar to what the medical field is doing?
I think that one of the dangers of keeping the practice of law so precious and where people really can't, access the legal help that they need, and we're keeping it to this very limited group that you just described, where you have a bachelor's degree, you go to 3 years of law school, you pass the bar. One of the consequences is that the market's going to start to work around you. So, when you look at something, if I were to do a LinkedIn search right now for contract manager, for example, I probably would see job openings, 20,000 job openings for contract managers. And when you think about back when I went to law school, when I think about like what contract managers do now, they're kind of drafting contracts, they're negotiating contracts, they're doing all this work that I thought sounds a lot like the practice of law to me. So the market sort of finds ways where we've been too restrictive, and I think that we as leaders in education should start to embrace that and say, let's not be afraid of it. Let's make sure that contract managers have the education they need to be able to do their jobs effectively. Let's make sure that paralegals have the education they need to be doing. So there are all kinds of people that are involved in various ways in legal professions that have been kind of outside the whole regulation structure. And I would love to see educational institutions. I think it's a huge opportunity for us to kind of be innovative and embrace that rather than being afraid of it. I think if we're afraid of it, we will make ourselves obsolete.
Yeah, and I think there'd be a lot of value to a lot more undergrad programs and associates programs having just some level of legal education. And I mean, in my undergrad, I got a minor in mass communications. I took a media law course for a semester, and that's hugely invaluable to understanding the nature of it. I feel like media creation's kind of a little different, where you better know a little bit of IP law and copyrights and things like that. It's really, really important, as we see in many YouTubers that don't understand that at all and end up in serious financial difficulties with dealing with the fallout. But I mean, if you're in a medical field, it'd probably be useful to understand some legal implications of HIPAA and things like that. If you're on, I don't know, the insurance industry, I don't know why I know anything about that, it'd be really helpful for them to understand some of the aspects of that, in addition to understanding administrative law, where do these regulations come from that they're forced to follow. It'd be great to see a lot more expansion of law into these other just not legal industries at all.
Yeah, now you're raising a kind of an additional opportunity for innovation in education. Is that something that I will frequently talk about in the undergraduate space, is that when you're whatever major you have, there are going to be certain requirements that you need for that major. But no matter what major someone is studying, there are legal frameworks and structures within which they are going to need to operate every single day. And it doesn't matter whether they're in a college of life sciences or business or engineering or, anthropology and archaeology, whatever it is. There are these legal frameworks that they're going to need to have some sort of knowledge of. And so I don't understand why I think that, law schools have typically been so isolated from undergraduate institutions. They need to be more integrated into undergraduate institutions, and we should have law-supported classes in all of these majors, which will help empower people. It doesn't take away jobs for lawyers. What it does, it makes better clients. It helps.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that that what you're talking about is a really important innovation that I think we're going to start to see coming in universities across the country.
All right, one last aspect of this that I feel like it's really important to bring up, and it's good for clicks: artificial intelligence, computers in the law, and things like that. There was a lot of expectation a few years back, especially, where it's we don't really need to innovate and allow more people to kind of get in the field. The lawyers will have all the AI bots. They'll be able to use these online tools to be able to do all the form building and things like that. I don't buy it. I've never really bought it. From one side, if you need a will creator or something like that, yeah, probably use ways you could just do that with an online system. But there's a human touch that's really required with law, where people don't understand it. It's hugely complex. You're in, probably, once again, talk about insurance. If you're dealing with a lawyer, things aren't going right, most likely. I mean, hopefully, it's a real estate attorney and you're buying a house. not necessarily the case if you're looking for a lawyer. You've got a messy divorce, you've got a dispute with your neighbor that you need to get, unfortunately, go to the courts or something like that. That human touch is profoundly important. Being able to expand that, maybe you don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars for just basic, like, navigating the court system would be enormous for judicial reform.
Yeah, I think two things sort of in reaction to what you're saying. One, I think that artificial intelligence tools can be, enormously valuable where we are, when you're working on a first draft for something, when you're doing some research, when you're like, there are so many ways that that those tools can be helpful and can, I think, make lawyers more efficient, drive down costs, make us, our capacity to have additional clients is enhanced. I mean, all of that is going to be phenomenal. But then the other thing that I would say on top of that is that where people add value is in kind of that human counseling, strategy, judgment space, and so as kind of a leader in education, what I'm trying to think of is how do we get these students the wisdom, for when I graduated, I did all of that like really boring work for years to kind of hopefully build my sense of business judgment and strategy and vision. But with students where AI tools are going to be doing some of that lower level work, how do we get these students like the wisdom of their like 30s and 40s without having to go through their teens and 20s? And how do we teach them those kinds of counseling soft skills? I think are going to be enormously important as we go forward. So real value, I think, in both ways, both on the AI tool side and then also on the human, putting the counselor focus in the lawyer role.
Dean Megan Carpenter, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, AJ. It's always a pleasure.
Law.unh.edu to check out the programs they've got over there. Their professors are all over the place in the news, so be sure to check out anytime you see UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law professors talking, and check out their programs. It might be something of interest you may not have thought of. NewEnglandTech.com, like and subscribe. Talk to you soon.